views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Welcome to BronxTalk. A month ago, in announcing his candidacy for president, Donald Trump made comments that were widely seen as offensive towards Mexican people. Since that time, corporations like NBC and Univision and Macy's have distanced themselves from Mr. Trump, and NASCAR and ESPN have canceled their involvement with Trump events. Here in the Bronx, as you probably know, the Trump golf links at Ferry Point Park had been opened with hopes by many in the Bronx to be part of a development boon to the borough. But now the PGA Tour, the LPGA Tour, the USGA and PGA of America have also distanced themselves from Trump and his remarks. So one has to wonder if the Trump golf course will ultimately be more albatross than boon to the Bronx. One of tonight's guests has a petition going with more than 6,500 signatures calling for the city to take Trump's name off the golf course. Another of our guests maintains that he was well within his right to free speech to say what he wants, regardless of whether anyone agrees or disagrees with him. In addition, he says contracts are contracts, and like it or not, Trump's name is on the Bronx golf course to say. So what, if anything, should or could be done with the Donald Trump links at Ferry Point, New York? That's our topic tonight, an important question for the Bronx, and everyone seems to have something to say about it. So you can join us on the phone and have yours say too. You call in at 718-960-7621. You can also email questions or comments to us at BronxTalk@BronxNet.org or put them on the BronxTalk Facebook page, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. For the here and now, it is the founder-editor of the highly regarded Welcome to the Bronx blog, Ed Garcia-Conde. And good evening, sir. Thank you for joining us again.
Thanks for having me.
And the vice chair of the Bronx GOP. Welcome back to Michael Rendino. Nice to have you, sir.
Thanks for having me, Gary.
So, gentlemen, let's start this way. Let's put up Mr. Trump's remarks. Let's read them. And so everybody, if you've never heard them, I don't know where you would have been, but this is exactly what he said. It was on June 16th, 2015. This is what stirred everyone up. He said, when Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems. And they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. That was what Donald Trump said on June 16th in announcing his candidacy just about a month ago. So can we agree, we'll start with you, Mr. Conde, this was out of bounds, right? You think it's out of bounds?
Absolutely out of bounds, especially with the fact that he tried to justify his comment by saying some people, I'm assuming, are good, and we all know that when someone says some, they're not talking about the majority in this case.
Mm-hmm. Your thoughts?
His comments were indefensible. The actual words that he said were hurtful and angry towards the Mexican people. Most illegal immigrants who come here from Mexico aren't coming here to rob, steal, or rape. They're coming here with ambitions and try and provide for their families.
Mm-hmm. So then back to you, Mr. Conde, why the petition?
Well, I feel that Trump is now a liability. His name is now a liability on our golf course, especially a golf course that was built with our tax dollars. Tax dollars that over 100,000 Mexican in this borough alone have contributed to the construction of that golf course. He didn't, a lot of people have this understanding that he built it. He did, but he built it with our money, over $230 million of our money. He put in slightly over $10 million for the clubhouse. So there's this responsibility, sure, there's freedom of speech, but there's also responsibility that comes with freedom of speech. And if you have a national platform like Donald Trump does, which a lot of people listen to, I think it's also important that we should examine, do we really want to associate ourselves with someone like that, especially considering that we are now the largest Latino borough in New York City. We have one of the largest Mexican populations. Lehman College is also the home of the only Institute of Mexican Studies on the Eastern Seaboard. So we have all these ties to the Mexican community, and his remarks not only insensitive, disparaging, and erroneous. We really have to ask ourselves, do we really want that liability? Because it's no longer just about what he said being wrong. It's now a liability with so many corporations pulling away from him.
I do want to interject one thing about what you said. Now, I talked to a number of people in preparation for this show about the golf course and how it got his name, et cetera, and they, while he is getting public dollars, they were all in agreement that this course would not have happened if it wasn't him, and he put a lot into it and he made it happen. So on that level, he gets credit for recognizing that maybe there was a development opportunity for him, but also for the borough of the Bronx, and many people are celebrating him for that.
Sure. And I definitely acknowledge that.
Okay. Mr. Rendino, so what do you think?
You nailed it, Gary. For 20 years, politicians have been trying to find something to do with that dump. We wanted to do a golf course for a long time. They went to Jack Nicklaus. They went to a lot of different people. They couldn't get it done. Donald Trump stepped up, said, I will do it. I could get it done. It's a lot of his ego and a lot of his bravado that he brings to it, but he did get it done. He did the same thing back in the 80s with Woolman Rink in Central Park. For 5 years, Ed Koch tried to get it finished, get it completed, couldn't do it. Donald Trump said, give it to me, I'll get it done. And within a year, he had it finished.
Has he sullied his name? And many people would think that it's not a good name to begin with, but if you take what you say at face value and say, well, he did the Lasker Rink, the Woolman Rink, the Central Park Carousel, he put money into the city, developing the city. Has he sullied all of that? Because there are clearly enough people who are saying, you know what, I'm not going near that name ever again.
Donald Trump has always been an oddball. He's always been wondering, what is he going to say next? This isn't a surprise. It shouldn't be a surprise to anybody who got into bed with him to get it done when it couldn't get done. When everyone showed up to get their photo op with him, to take pictures with him, they knew Donald Trump and who he was before he started this project.
Mm-hmm. So the Daily News had a story that his contracts were protected at minimum over basic free speech, and that was, as I mentioned at the outset, one of your big issues on this. Councilman Mark Levine called on the Parks Department to immediately use the out clauses in the contracts to cut ties with him over what he called despicable comments. Is this reality? Is this something you'd recommend? How do you see that?
Under free speech, I think he has to be protected. If I would be out there protesting it, as people have done. I've said I would support a protest. I wasn't able to make it the one we've had. I mean, there should be an apology from him towards the Mexican people. The topic of illegal immigration and securing the border, he has merits there. That's a populist message. That's what he's trying to convey, and that's what he's trying to hit on. But as for his insult to Mexicans, it was a little personal, and an apology should happen. Should we throw him out? That's a whole nother topic. I think he's protected under free speech.
Your petition, what's the status of that right now?
Currently, like you mentioned, it's over 6,500 and growing every day. It's been widely circulated around major media, including the Spanish newspapers, El Diario, La Prensa, New York One. So it's gaining traction.
But what's the reality? Again, it's and we can talk. The next line of questioning is going to be, what is going to be the effect of this? But what is the reality of a guy who's got a contract with the city? And again, others that I've talked to said, there's like nothing you can do. You can't just take his name off it. You signed away this thing.
Well, there were two. In the Daily News article, they also mentioned that the Parks Commissioner can actually terminate at will the
I do
contract.
have the language. It says, is turnable at will by the Commissioner in the sole absolute discretion at any time. Such termination shall not be arbitrary or capricious.
Exactly, and now we're facing a financial liability. Will this golf course actually attract all the all these great things that we were promised? We're promised like having PGA golf courses. We have all the major golf organizations pulling away from Trump. You have have Los Angeles, where they pulled away their support from one of Trump's golf course. You have Ricky Martin, who pulled away from another golf course. You have all these big names and corporations pulling away from the Trump name. So now it's no longer just arbitrary, but it's actually a financial liability for us. We can't measure it right now, but there is a financial liability with the Trump name being so sullied now with so many people against it.
Mike Rendino, just hypothetically, let's say the city attempts to do that. What happens to that golf course then? What now?
Exactly. That's a great question. Nobody stepped up to do it. No one's been able to run it now. Plus, it'll have that taboo name on it because it was taken from Donald Trump. As of right now, I drove by the other day. The Yankees had an outing there. The Mets had an outing there. It's still sold out. There's people playing every day. I think over time it has to play out over supply and demand. We'll see on the free market what happens. Do people show up or do people not show up? If people don't show up, he can't make his financial obligations. He loses the contract. Someone else steps in and takes it over.
So you think the free market should just determine this?
Correct.
Is it?
But I also believe with Ed here that if Ed gets out there, protests, gets his 6,500 people out there, and they're out there protesting every day, people aren't going to golf there, and that's going to affect the free market, and that's his right to do.
So that's as free a market as anything else, I guess. So I appreciate your equanimity in that. We do have Alex from the East Bronx on the phone. Alex, good evening. Thanks for joining us. Hi, Alex.
Hey, good evening. How are you?
Good. Now, I just want to be clear. You are Alex Gomez, who is running for city council.
Correct. Alex A. Gomez from the Bronx, New York, District 13.
Okay. And you are an announced You are an announced candidate for, I guess, what will be a vacated seat by Jimmy Vaca when he's ultimately term limited out.
Correct.
Okay. So what do you got to say? What's your thoughts?
Well, every day I wake up and every night that I come home, I see that golf course right out my window. So I personally have seen it over the last 5 years. My wife grew up in the community, actually grew up right next to where the golf course is at right now. I have family and friends. And unfortunately, I think not only did Trump make a mistake by saying what he said, and I feel that it was disrespectful. I don't necessarily think we want an apology from Donald Trump. We need the city to just cut ties. And I know that you spoke already about the law and how the law says that he has the right to say what he wants because of freedom of speech, which I respect. But I do believe that there will be a way to get Trump out of the contract with the city. Unfortunately, I think this goes beyond that. I think that the city made a mistake when they got him involved. Yes, he did get the golf course completed, but at that point, the city had already invested over $230 million, and the taxpayers are the ones being raped. We have people golfing for $169.
That of course is another. That's of course another issue. Let me ask you something. Do you think the bigger issue is because of his remarks it should be removed, or is the bigger issue because the potential is, as I mentioned at the top of the show, there were going to be organizations and others who won't participate? In other words, do you think free speech or his speech is definitely the issue, or are you more concerned because maybe the golf course will not be economically feasible anymore?
I think it's both. I think that it's economically feasible for his pocket and for his friends, but honestly, who in this community will benefit from a golf course? Who's going to not pay rent or not buy groceries to go golfing on the weekend? So no one in this community is benefiting from it, and I don't even think anyone in the Bronx, unless you probably live in Riverdale, can afford to
be careful about
here.
that.
This is not a true municipal golf course.
Yeah. So let me. I know Mike Rendino has a reaction to that. I've known him long enough to know. I'm just going to give you the philosophy. Okay, and the philosophy was that even if Bronxites, some people who don't have money or as much money as some others, don't participate, the idea is they would ultimately benefit because tournaments and other things would come here and people would play, they would stay in the new hotel, they would go to our beautiful, wonderful restaurants that are all throughout the borough, not only in Belmont, they're in the South Bronx, they're in the North Bronx, and that's how the people of the Bronx would benefit. Alex, thank you very much. We appreciate your call, and we'll let Mike Rendino, I'm sure you have a reaction to that.
I'm just curious with Alex and Ed, were they against the golf course before it happened? Before Donald Trump said this, did they think it was wrong for the Bronx? Did they think it was wrong for the space? Or is it just because Donald Trump said this that they're against it now? Right. Because we do know it is an expensive...
Sure. I can answer that easily. I was all for the golf course because I did recognize that.
Did we lose Alex? So I guess Alex is gone, but okay.
But I absolutely was for the golf course. I didn't know the particulars at first that it was going to be so expensive. I mean, we're a borough of golf courses as well. People don't realize. People think that this is the only golf course we have. We have the oldest municipal golf course at Van Cortlandt Park, which people actually can afford to play at, and it's a municipal golf course, and it's a very high-end looking golf course. You have Split Rock, you have Mosholu. So this is not by any chance like the first golf course. So. It's not a foreign concept.
This cuts to something that Mike Rendino and I have talked about on and off the air. Do you buy the explanation that I gave to Alex that there will be a trickle-down effect? Do you buy that it's good for the Bronx, even if Bronxites don't play? Because you know what? It'll attract people from other places, and we certainly want to bring other monies to help fund, jobs and restaurants and hotels and something else.
Absolutely, and it goes back. But no, well, I buy into it, but has it happened is the question. And you mentioned something earlier about Yankee Stadium. Has it happened
That was before we
were on the air, yeah.
Right.
But has that happened to the local community? Yankee Stadium is the perfect example of such a huge municipal project where it hasn't truly trickled down to the community. It's benefited the bars.
Let me tell you something, Mike Rendino. I don't know if I'm saying something out of turn. He has a business right down there on River Avenue, well-known business, and so you would have something to say about that.
We benefit from sporting events, and we do. We could even benefit more if there was a better planning thing. I think the problem with this golf course isn't necessarily just the golf course. The problem is there's no plan for the surrounding area. You had the only hotel, which was a great opportunity for a major hotel to come, it turned into a homeless shelter. You have Ferry Point Park. The local councilman has to get there, has to get down with the community board. They have to start talking about rezoning it, mixed use, like we talked about the Gateway Center. What can we use for Ferry Point Park? We have a ferry. So we have a ferry coming there.
In addition to dealing with that golf course, that should have been done simultaneously.
Absolutely.
I do want to ask you a political question because I've heard that you would be interested in running for that seat ultimately when it happens. You've been part of the GOP. Would you, so tell all, are you planning to run for that seat?
I'm open to all possibilities. Right now, my only concern, I am commissioner of the Bronx Board of Elections. We have a presidential election coming up in 2016, and my only concern is getting as many Bronxites as possible registered and voting and correcting some of this abysmal turnout over the last year.
What would make you want to run or not want to run?
Well, I always want to run because I always want to help my community and change things and make it a better place. However, I would have to discuss that with my wife and my family, and there's a lot more than just me to make that
Gary,
decision.
No, you don't discuss with me. That's probably not going to happen. Another thing that, frankly, people, if you follow the Bronx Facebook pages, as we all really do, you and I went back and forth a little bit, and I'm going to ask you in public. Juan Gonzalez in the news reported, and Ed mentioned here on the show, that the city is in for $230 million of public funding, and Trump is also going to get what appears to be about $300,000 a year in water fees that he won't have to pay. Is it appropriate for a presidential candidate to be receiving public subsidies for a development project like this that ultimately will go into his pocket?
And let's not forget, excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt, the 5 years that he's not paying rent on the property as well.
Okay. Add it to the list.
Well, I don't know if it matters because he is a presidential candidate or not. I'm sure his corporations are separate from his public life, so I don't think that's an issue. Now, if you want to have a discussion about using public monies for private corporations and stuff, that's a whole other thing.
Okay. Ricky Martin canceled his golf tournament. I mean, what happens if more and more people do that?
He's feeling pressure right now. He's got to produce. Look, and there's no guarantee he's going to be right. Look at his casinos. He had failed casinos and failed businesses just as much as he's been successful, and he built half of the West Side Highway.
And you can also add to the fact that just 2 days ago, the golf course that has his name in Puerto Rico just filed for bankruptcy. So it doesn't mean that. I mean, he actually doesn't operate it. He licensed his name to the golf course, and Puerto Rico is a golfing mecca. And if his name couldn't save this golf course, then what is that?
Well, certainly now his name is not what
this was
it was.
Just 2 days ago in Puerto Rico. The golf course just filed for bankruptcy, which actually bears, they licensed Trump's name. So what's to say that, like, how that his name is going to save us?
So then back to you, Mike Rendino, as a businessman and certainly has followed this golf course all along. If in fact that happens, I mean, you were saying let the free market play out. We need another Donald Trump to save it, don't we?
We need something or someone to step in and save
So
it,
it-
absolutely.
so that-
it's a lot easier, though, to step in and save something once someone's already built it, though, and redefine it other than creating something that's not there altogether. And he has to get credit for that no matter what.
So one of the things...
Absolutely, he can get credit for that. I don't mean to interrupt you. He can get credit for that. That's fine. But what is the right thing? Is the right thing letting him continue to have his name on a golf course in the Bronx with a population that he insulted, or do we give it to someone else and still give him credit for doing it? Yes, he did the job. Again, with our money, but he did the job.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we do?
Maybe we should ask the guy with the petition. So what happens if you win? What happens if, the city says, okay, we're taking Trump's name off that golf course? Then what do you do? I mean, if I remember correctly in your petition, you say, well, let's kind of give it back to the city. I mean, what are we doing if Trump's name is not on that golf course?
Well, Trump's name is not on 3 golf courses in the Bronx, and they're doing very well. So,
but those were created
course.
under certainly different circumstances.
Exactly, but still, it shows that that the golfing industry is still pretty strong and without a Trump name. So, if we can find someone to operate it, another concessionaire that would operate it now that it's built and constructed, and someone who has a little bit more ethics to how they speak in public about people, then I'm all for it.
I should mention, you mentioned the Marshalloo golf course, although the Marshalloo driving range is not doing very well. In fact, it doesn't exist, and that's another whole show that we can talk about. Just back to the politics of it, sure. Mr. Rendino. Lindsey Graham told CNN that his rants on immigration stem from ignorance. You certainly didn't disagree with that. But he says he's digging a hole, and if he keeps digging, we'll never win the White House. So this is a little bit separate from the question of the golf course. Will you relish seeing Donald Trump there and with all the other Republican candidates debating for the presidency?
I was surprised after what happened, how quickly he jumped ahead, but that was him announcing. It's early. Name recognition goes a long way. And his message right now, it's a populist message, He's anti-politician, anti-establishment. He's saying some of the things the establishment doesn't want to say, and there's a certain amount of people out there that want to hear it. And it is not necessarily good for the Republican brand, but we are open, and we want everybody. We want every point of view. Like I've said to you on the past shows, we're the party of choice. We have pro-life and pro-choice senators in the U.S. Senate.
Mm-hmm. Of course, there are many people who would disagree with that.
I'm sure.
I can quickly disagree with that, because if that was the case, then we wouldn't have so many contentious, hearings in Congress on fighting on such issues. So if that was the case, we wouldn't be having these problems.
And again, the effect of the whole question of immigration does, and I'll start with you, Ed Condi. Do Donald Trump's comments make it so that the pendulum will now swing the other way, that people will kind of overreact in the other direction and say, you know what, this was so offensive, maybe we really ought to handle immigration in a different way?
It's quite possible. I mean, it wasn't just about the Mexican people that he misspoke. He misspoke about a lot of things. He's talking about how China is overtaking everything, and Mexico is destroying our economy, yet his products are made in China and Mexico. So, you can't have one or the other. And as far as the immigration talk, that he's talking about how we're not getting the best from Mexico. Mexico's not sending our best. What happened in Georgia when Georgia tightened their immigration laws and the Mexican population left? They lost $1 billion in crops because the supposed jobs that the undocumented immigrants were taking There was no one there to take those jobs. What happened in our Arizona, when Arizona enacted their harsh laws, within the first few months, they lost about over $140 million because of their anti-immigration laws. The fact of the matter remains that in this nation, undocumented immigrants fill a huge economic gap that's a positive impact.
Do you want to respond to that, or you want me to follow up with a question?
No, I agree. Undocumented illegal immigrants serve a purpose. They're here.
Well, no human's illegal.
They're here, and it's not their fault that these things are happening. Right. It is the cowardice politicians who are not enforcing laws and creating things such as sanctuary cities in San Francisco and here in New York. I mean, we remember New York City pre-Giuliani. Security is something.
We're almost out of time. Does Trump's comments hurt this dialogue, or are they going to help, frankly, people who think like you do?
Well, people who think like I do. I don't know. You don't really know how I think.
Well,
he is opening up a discussion, and he is touching subjects that people don't want to go to. In 1986, Reagan signed amnesty.
So
he also promised to secure the border. He failed.
I want to conclude with the golf course, but
sure.
In some ways, having this dialogue is a healthy thing.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately,
something has to be done.
Hard way.
Something has to be done for the immigrant population that's here illegally.
Is the lesson for the Bronx: don't make a deal with the devil?
Has that not always been the lesson with Bronx politicians? Has it not been from Pedro Espada on?
Well, but the borough president was there with Donald Trump hailing a development project, and now he might feel on some level, we'll ask him, but he has egg on his face.
I'm sure he does. I'm sure he feels betrayed by it.
Your thoughts on that?
I agree with that as well. You know, I mean, here's Donald Trump, who historically has had problems with minorities. I mean, we go back to the 1970s when he was sued by the federal government because of his housing policies. Even though he didn't lose technically, they came to an agreement where they had to monitor his renting to people of color. Mm-hmm. So if we have someone with that history, why are we working with that person?
Gentlemen, this was a really good show with two really good guests. Mike Rendino from the GOP, thank you so much.
Thank you,
and Garcia Condi
Thanks.
from Welcome to the Bronx, thank you. And the dialogue is rich and strong in the Bronx, and that's what we're all about. If you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at BronxTalk@BronxNet.org or put them on our Facebook page, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. You can be sure to like Bronx Talk on Facebook. You can check out the archives at BronxNet.org. You'll find Bronx Talk on the lower right navigation bar. Now, next week, we'll have some state legislators here to be talking about the legislative session just passed, the mayor and the governor, and much more. So thanks to our producer, Dalia, our director is Shirley, Helen and Bianca, the cast, the thousands, to you, to them. We'll see you next week. Good night.
Body language can tell you all sorts of things. Like someone is having a stroke. Know the sudden signs. Learn fast. Face drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulty. Time to call 911 and get them to a hospital immediately. Learn the body language and spot a stroke fast.
If you drive buzzed, it could cost you around $10,000. You'll face major legal fees, major fines, and steep insurance penalties. You could lose everything. Buzzed, busted, and broke. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.